ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us this evening. For each year at the Asan Plenum, we actually have a special book launching ceremony. We usually choose a book by one of the internationally renowned experts on national security and foreign affairs issues. This year is a very special occasion. We have translated the autobiography of the founder of Hyundai, Asan Plenum, and it's an incredible feeling. It's an incredible honor to be able to launch this English translation in the context of the Asan Plenum. For me, it's really been an incredible journey trying to working with our researchers to translate this book. We really felt that this was a book not just for Koreans. This really is much of an explanation of how Korea was able to arrive as any other book you will ever have a chance to read, whether it be by an economist or political scientist. I think this book better explains the Korean experience than anything you'll ever come across in the near future. So to help us launch this book and to provide the context and as well as personal recollection regarding the author and the content of the book, we have a pretty impressive array of speakers. And so I will introduce each one of them, and so please join me in welcoming them to the stage. So I'll start with the honorary chairman and founder of the Asan Institute for Policy Studies. I always tell him he's a man of incredible achievements, and I always love to say of his many achievements. No. I want to say this. Please welcome Dr. M.J. Chung. Let me finish the sentence. I always say founding of the Asan Institute is one of his greatest achievements. I'm sure you'll agree. Thank you. Next, we have he is one of the models. He's a founder of a think tank after which Asan Institute is modeled. And he's been, your institution has been called the pantheon of conservative establishment. And he has changed what a think tank is, and he has really changed the way in which think tanks are able to really affect policy making in a way that nobody else has done before. And of course, he is Asan Plenum Fellow. And if you ever have a chance to visit the Heritage Foundation, which he founded, you will find that there is actually an Asan Plenum room that honors the author of the book that we're launching today. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Ed Feulner. Thank you. Next, we have a Pulitzer Prize winner, the chairman of the board of the Rand Corporation, senior fellow at the SBelfer Center. I don't want to stand in front of you. I don't want to block you. I don't want to block you. She has been one of the, she's been a publisher of the Wall Street Journal, one of the leading analysts of Middle Eastern politics, but also a great friend of Korea's. And she actually met and covered Asan Plenum back in 1992. So please join me in welcoming Ms. Karen House to the stage. She has 4 children, and 2 of them are Korean adopted children from Korea. And so, thank you. Next, we have somebody who has been one of the foremost thinkers in terms of U.S. foreign policy, national security. He has served as twice as the Deputy Secretary of Defense of the United States, and he has served as the President of the World Bank and one of the foremost security intellectuals of the United States. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Paul Wolfowitz to the stage. Finally, I would like to introduce a former teacher of M.J. Chung's. When Dr. Chung was a freshman in college at Seoul National, he took a course from Dr. Lee Hong-gu, of course, all of you know, who served as twice as the vice premier for national unification, as the prime minister, as the ambassador to the Court of St. James, and also as the ambassador to the United States. And so please join me in welcoming Dr. Lee Hong-gu to the stage. So, okay, so I've asked each speaker to speak for maybe 5 to 7 minutes. I know, Ed, you're going to go longer, you told me. But so without further ado, I'd like to first turn the microphone over to Dr. M.J. Chung for his remarks.
오늘 회의를 저희들이 영어로 하면은 동시 통역기를 준비했으니까요. 양해해 주시면 저도 잘 못하지만 영어로 좀 하겠습니다. 고맙습니다. Thank you everyone for coming. My father's autobiography was published 22 years ago in 1997. It seemed natural that an English edition would follow. However, I was rather hesitant about having the book translated because I was not sure a translation could do justice to my father's inimitable style of writing. It has been 18 years since my father passed away, and there is now a translation that does at least partial justice to the original. Reading his autobiography in English made me realize again just how much we all miss him. In the book he says, I believe that 90% of my life has been full of joy and meaning. I have truly lived well. On this point, I am skeptical whether my father was telling the truth. Friends and colleagues, this is my joke, and I want you to laugh at this moment. The reason for publishing the English translation of my father's autobiography is not to show what a special person my father was. He was, to be sure, but the message that my father wanted to convey to the reader is success will come to even a boy from the most impoverished and humble background if he lives by the values of diligence and integrity. Today, my most poignant memories of my father are not so much his accomplishment as how hard he worked day in and day out, how he struggled. As my father said, his legacy to the next generation is my simple belief in the purity of work. When I was a student at MIT Sloan School in 1979, I wrote my master's thesis titled Business Ideology. I was inspired to write this thesis by a book entitled The American Business Creed. That book explained why American businessmen went into business. Today, my question is, what motivates today's businessmen? Trying to understand the relationship between business and society still remains important and not easy. My question is whether, for example, businessmen in Korea are properly acknowledged or not. The social role of businessmen is an age-old question. It is a question that needs to be asked and answered every day. I hope that the publication of the English translation of my father's autobiography provides the occasion for us to reflect again on this important question. Recently, a Vietnamese, a young boy from Vietnam, who had worked in Korea for a couple of years, translated my father's autobiography into Vietnamese on his own initiative without any consultation with us. And I simply learned the book has sold over 500,000 copies. On a proper occasion in the near future, I hope to have my father's autobiography translated in Chinese and Japanese as well. I hope to see many of you again on that occasion. Thank you very much. 자, 고맙습니다.
Ed, please.
Thank you, Chaibong. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, and especially members of the Chung family. Chairman Chung Ju-young's life story is a compelling one. From an impoverished beginning with limited education and limited opportunity to the most dynamic and successful business leader in the history of his nation. To read his biography is to share a story of heroic escape, adventure, experimentation, diligence, and success, intermingled with extreme disappointment and setbacks, only to watch a repeated rebounding to new heights greater than ever could be foreseen. As I read the book, I noted the people, the dates, the facts, the challenges, the setbacks and achievements, but mostly I focused on the lessons that this simple farm boy shared with all of us. I'd like to share some of those lessons with you today, lessons learned the hard way from Chung Ju-young. The first lesson I call opportunity for all. As he said early in his life story, quote, "With strong conviction and concentrated effort, everyone has an equal chance to succeed." End quote. Success is 90% determination, 10% confidence. But to succeed, we must persevere, quote, "Because a challenge without a struggle is not a challenge at all. And be diligent, because diligence mirrors your sincerity about living a full life." The chairman goes on to admonish us in his straightforward way that unless your life goal is wasting time, then the first thing I recommend is to be diligent. Being diligent forces you to move a lot, think a lot, and work a lot. My first meeting with the chairman was in his office here in Seoul when he granted me a brief interview in 1979 to learn of our new Asian Studies Center at the Heritage Foundation. He was interested, asked several tough questions, but made no commitment. When he agreed to meet me several months later, I was received like an old friend and presented a significant gift for Heritage with his best wishes to focus our efforts on the Korean Peninsula. Some years later, in another meeting, he requested I should look after his son, then a graduate student at Washington Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. I told him that indeed I had met that son, MJ, and that he was doing very well at SAIS. He was pleased. In another context, he said of you, I was not the kind of father who would tell a talented and independent son to stand down, nor was my son the kind of person to ever give up. In this way, he is just like me. A year later, my acquaintanceship with MJ deepened, and I invited him to attend Heritage's annual leadership conference in Pinehurst, North Carolina. Today, I don't remember who the speakers were, but I do recall a wonderful 2-hour ride on horseback with Dr. and Mrs. Chung, Mong, Joon, and Young Mong, and Linda and me. And even here, there's a lesson. The chairman writes, quote, "A friend once told me, I don't envy powerful officials or wealthy businessmen, but I do envy those with a great wife." Later, my Heritage colleague, Dick Allen, who had served as Ronald Reagan's first national security advisor, and I hosted a small dinner party for the chairman in Washington to celebrate the American introduction of the pony. We presented the chairman with Washington, D.C. license plate PONY, and this simple car led to the incredible story of Hyundai, the automobile market disruptor in the United States. A little off the subject, but here's a very practical result of Linda and me with our brand new Genesis G90, which we purchased just last month. We love it. Back to the story. It was on that trip that Dick Allen arranged for the chairman to have a private meeting with President Reagan, which is remembered in a famous photo from the Oval Office in the White House, which is reprinted in the book. There's a lesson there. In fact, there are many life lessons that Ronald Reagan and Chung Ju-young could share. I'm reminded of the chairman's admonition to always be on the lookout for simple solutions, especially when I focus on Ronald Reagan's quick response regarding what outcome he expected from the U.S.-Soviet confrontation. He replied, "We win, they lose." Pretty simple. Still later, I was awestruck when I heard firsthand the plans of the chairman to deliver 1,001 cows to North Korea in splendid Hyundai trucks from the Ulsan assembly line. Lesson from that, a quote, "Korean reunification is on the horizon, and when the day arrives, a unified Korea must play a pivotal role in affairs." Meanwhile, the Hyundai name spread around the world in construction projects on every continent, ships sailing on every sea, and cars driving on every highway. Lesson, quote, "Through our long history, Hyundai has overcome many adverse conditions and has learned everything is possible if we just set our minds to it." We arranged a private meeting for the chairman and MJ with the person whom we were honored to call patron of the Heritage Foundation, Lady Margaret Thatcher, when in her presence at a formal dinner, we announced the establishment of the Chung Ju-young Fellowship at Heritage in 1999. Shortly thereafter, in 2001, the chairman passed. And his nation and his friends around the world mourned his passing, even as we celebrated his life and his achievements. On a trip soon after to Seoul, MJ escorted me to the gravesite, where I paid my personal respects and recounted my personal memories of this incredible man who had become a personal role model for me. As a lasting tribute to this extraordinary man of vision and leadership, we are honored to have the Chung Ju-young Fellowship at the Heritage Foundation. Since my retirement as president, I'm honored to bear that title at Heritage and to keep alive his name, reputation, and passion of this extraordinary person who taught me and all of us so many lessons. I conclude by saying that in addition to these cosmic lessons, The chairman inspired me from the sublime to the ridiculous in very practical ways. Two final quotes. The sublime came through when he said near the end of his life, quote, "Even now, I don't think I'm too old to work. Work knows no age. For the very best workers, there is only the next assignment and the passion for the job." The ridiculous was when he said, "I never set aside time to recover from jet lag." Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening to my reminiscences.
Thank you, Dr. Feulner. Ms. Karen House, please.
Is this on? We don't have to do anything? Okay. Good evening, ladies, gentlemen, and family. I'm speaking tonight as one of the very direct beneficiaries of this English translation, because without this book in English, even though I've been coming to Korea for nearly 30 years, I do not speak the language, so I wouldn't be able to experience his spirit and his wisdom were it not for this translation. Like most of you, I was aware of his remarkable story, and I met him in 1992 when he was a candidate for president, and I was at the Wall Street Journal. But you don't, talking to him through an interpreter, you don't hear his voice the way you do in this English translation. So for all of you who aren't Korean and can't read his book in that language, we're all grateful to the Asan Foundation for this translation. His life is clearly, as Ed said, one great adventure after another. The triumph of determination and courage and a commitment to do what was right, not what was expedient, so that he ran away from home 3 times. He did not want to be an impoverished farmer in the north. And then finally, on his 4th time, he succeeded in getting a job in Seoul as a laborer in the harbor, and then being a delivery man for a rice merchant. And from that beginning, he worked so hard that the rice merchant chose to sell him, not his son, the business. But as would happen to him over and over, just as things were going well, some tragedy would strike. So the Japanese occupiers took over the rice industry, and he lost his shop. So he began an auto repair shop, and that was just beginning to do well when it burned down. So over and over, as Ed said, he continues to triumph over tragedy. He began the Hyundai Motor Company after the war, and discovered, as he says in the book, that there was more money in construction. So he began Hyundai Construction, and that company had a project to build a bridge, and he almost went bankrupt building that bridge, but he was determined to do what he had said he would do, because to do otherwise would be to destroy his trustworthiness. So he wasn't just a businessman who refused to give up, but it wasn't just determination, it was also creativity. He built a ship as he was building the dock in which it was being constructed. As a Middle East reporter, I was particularly struck with the winning the Jubail project, which you saw flash by in the video, but he competed against well-established American, Japanese, and other companies to win that huge project at a time when the government here was saying, well, planned economy and less competition is better for us. So he went, in essence, he went abroad to compete and earned very necessary hard currency for Korea. If you can read only one chapter in the book, I would urge everyone read the chapter about his efforts to win the Olympics for Korea in 1988, because he describes in such great dramatic detail going to Baden-Baden and the Korean government officials who were supposed to help him sell the Olympics in Seoul to his colleagues basically didn't think it was going to work. So he believed, and he and his team continued until they, as you all know, defeated the Japanese in winning the Olympics. It comes through in the book that he literally, as I think someone has already said, personified what it is about Korea that turned it from a war-torn, impoverished country into a role model for the whole world on economic development and democracy. And I want to cite my two favorite, as Ed cited his, two favorite philosophies that he mentions in the book. One of them was, he says that time is the equity we all get equally, which, if you think about it, is absolutely true. Everyone gets 24 hours a day. Most of us just don't use it as intelligently and efficiently as he did. And the other was his emphasis on trustworthiness, that trustworthiness is your personal capital. If you have that, you can get financial capital. If you don't have that, you don't have anything. And lastly, he talks about his determination never to give up, and mentions, as Ed mentioned, that his own son shares that trait, and that when Dr. Chung was encouraged to get out of the National Assembly elections by the government, he did not do that. And as Asan Chung writes in the book, in that way, he is very like me. And I assume that you've probably never had a higher compliment.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Karen. Next, Dr. Paul Wolfowitz. Paul, please.
I was fortunate enough to meet Chung Ju-young, thanks to his brilliant son, MJ, who is a PhD from Johns Hopkins SAIS, where I became the dean in 1994. So needless to say, when I came to Korea, I paid a visit on MJ, and he introduced me to his father. I, like Karen, have to say that, with no offense to your translating skills, his personality did not come through with your translation the way it does come through in this book, and it's dramatic in the book. But one story that he told us, or told me, is very dramatic, and to me it's interesting also that it does not appear in his autobiography. That's the story of his visit to his aunt in North Korea. He told me at the time that in the middle of the night she came to him in his room, put a blanket over both of their heads, and said, and this after all was a historic family reunion of the greatest industrialist in South Korea visiting his home in North Korea. You would have thought it was a wonderful occasion. She said, "Please leave as soon as possible. You're causing us nothing but trouble." It's a measure of how scary and frightening and oppressive North Korea was. And I won't surprise you, I looked in the book to find this story repeated, and it's not there at all. So I asked Chaibong and MJ what might have happened, and they said, well, at the time he wrote the autobiography, those relatives were still alive, and putting that story in the book might have hurt them. By now it's 22 years later, and so I can safely tell it, so I'm telling you a secret that's not in the book, but it's quite a book. I have read, I'm not a connoisseur of business literature, but I've read a few business books. I have to admit that I picked this up thinking maybe it'll be another boring business book. It's nothing like it. It's quite dramatic. I should also add, by the way, I also met him when he came to Johns Hopkins in 1994 to receive an honorary degree from, 95 rather, honorary degree, in no small measure because he founded a professorship in international finance that really is one of the key programs now at Johns Hopkins SAIS. I'm very proud of it, and and MJ should be also proud of it. And of course, in the presentation of the honorary doctorate, they talk a lot about his business achievements. They didn't say, in my view, after reading this book, nearly enough about his intellect. There's an interesting anecdote in this book where he was in England trying to get some funding, desperately get some funding for starting Hyundai shipbuilding. And he was meeting with the vice president of Barclays, who was critical for getting the British government to give a loan guarantee for the money he had to borrow, which I think was something like $20 million, which was real money back then. And when they sat down for lunch, the vice president of Barclays, who had seen their business plan, asked him, well, Chairman Chung, did you study engineering or business? And I think because he was a little bit sensitive, because he had once been condescended to by a senior Japanese industrialist because he didn't have a college education, I think he was initially taken aback. And then he realized that this man from Barclays had just seen his business plan. And he said, oh, you must be talking about our business plan. Well, we were up at Oxford the other day and showed it to the professors there, and they asked if I had a business degree, and I said no. And they said, well, this is better than any business student at Oxford could do. And the man from Barclays said, it's much better than any business student at Oxford could do. He was a real intellectual in a practical way, and that comes through in this book also. One of the things that makes it actually exciting to read, and as I said, I was surprised to be excited, but he was always living on the edge. In fact, he was accused of recklessness. I'm going to come back to this in a minute. I think it was a key part of his success. So almost every one of these big stories has moments where you think he's about to fall off the tightrope. For example, there was the drama in bidding on this huge port in Saudi Arabia that Karen mentioned in Jubail, where at the last minute, one of his colleagues from Hyundai, in explicit contradiction of his instructions, added $60 million to their bid. And of course, Chung Ju-young was furious at somebody disobeying his orders on something as sensitive as the size of the bid. And this colleague of his said, but Mr. Chairman, I know you were very clear about what you wanted, but we would have gone broke if we had won the bid at that price. It was much too low. And Chung was furious, didn't get over it until it finally turned out that it was, even with the extra $60 million, it was a low bid, and you can catch your breath after that. In the building of the Goryeo Bridge that, again, Karen mentioned, they were digging tunnels through whole mountains with equipment that they had never used before. It was really quite a feat. And there are several others here where they were either about to run into some geological catastrophe or even worse, run out of money, because he was always working with borrowed money and very tight deadlines. I'd like to turn to what I think is the bigger picture in this book, and that is, and it's been referred to, and it has to be referred to anytime you're in Korea. No one would have believed that Korea would be where it is today. I have read, I wasn't old enough to read them then, but I'm old enough, I probably could have if I was more educated. You could read very respected economists writing in the early 1960s in the United States that South Korea was a hopeless basket case. with no natural resources, failing to understand that the human resources were the most important thing. But this is almost funny in retrospect, burdened with a Confucian ethic that teaches that gentlemen don't work and they wear white clothes and grow their fingernails long to demonstrate their contempt for manual labor. Well, obviously the people who wrote that had never met Chung Ju-young, who grew up on a farm and never shrank from manual labor, even when he was the chairman of Hyundai. The result, I think, is that there's a political and economic miracle that really is one of the wonders of the world. It's not a miracle at all, it's a human creation, but a remarkable one. And it's symbolized, I think, more than anything else by the fact that a South Korean company is making a car which is one of the best and most respected and most popular in the United States. I would not have predicted that 10 or 15 years ago, even knowing as much as I thought I knew. I mentioned the recklessness. He wasn't really reckless, he was a risk taker. There's a big difference. But he was fearless. And I've noticed in reading and learning about entrepreneurs that one of the key things to being a successful entrepreneur is fearlessness. It's bravery. It's something that a quality we ordinarily associate with warriors, with generals. He wasn't a warrior. In fact, the term he wanted people to think of him as was a builder, not a businessman, not a financier, but a builder, somebody who created things. And he was a great creator and a relentless hard worker. He was also, like most of the best generals I know, always taking care of his troops, always aware that the people who worked for him were his most important resource and he needed to look after them. Particularly, actually, if he had scolded them unfairly, as he did scold one man who was very slow getting him out of a near-fatal accident in building the port in, I think in Ulsan. And then he realized that he owed his life to this man. He apologized very graciously. He was a realist about human nature. He writes in this book, in the world of business, there is no goodwill and no good Samaritan. And when he was approached with a very flattering letter asking him, referring to his great success as a businessman, asking him to take on the chairmanship of the bidding committee for the Olympics for South Korea, he said, I knew the purpose of this flattery was to get me to accept a job so that if things went badly, as they probably would, they could blame me for it. But in spite of that realism and a certain level of sensible cynicism, he was a great patriot who really believed in this country and seems constantly to have thought of his success as being a success for Korea, and in a way even more, a failure by him would be a failure for his country, and he wasn't about to allow that. He understood, as I think every good general understands, that time is everything. The same decision made 6 months too late is not the right decision any longer, because the competition or the enemy in the case of war has gone somewhere else. And the last thing I would say about him is that he clearly had that rare quality that is a strategic vision, which doesn't mean just a dream. It means having a notion of where you might be in 5 or 10 years, but also figuring out all the steps you have to take on the way to get there. And the building of Hyundai was a remarkable strategic achievement. Reading this book, it's clear to me that Hyundai would not have happened without without Chung Ju-young. And if you look for econometric models about the Korean economy in any period, there's no factor for the Chung Ju-youngs or for this particular individual. I think it's probably not unreasonable to say that without South Korea's success, we might not be witnessing the kind of success that China has demonstrated in the last 30 years. Because in many ways, it was an example that inspired other people to say, if they can do it, it's possible. In Leo Tolstoy's great book, War and Peace, he puts the question of, do great leaders really change history, or is history something that just happens because of masses of people? I think Tolstoy was a cynic in that regard. One thing he says in the book, a king is history's slave. A leader is the wave that is pushed ahead by the ship. This was no leader being pushed ahead by the ship. Chung Ju-young was a leader who was leading a great business and in the process helping to lead a whole country. I'd like to just conclude, if I might, with two passages, one by himself, talking about in a sense, his political philosophy summarized quite simply. We are all equal, he said. In any great society, equality is regarded as the highest principle. That's a remarkable statement in a way from a businessman who was, in so many respects, unequal in any country. But he understood, in terms of the respect owed to individuals, all people are equal. But he didn't succumb to the notion that, therefore, society should guarantee equal results for everyone. He also writes in the following page, nothing is more unnatural than the deprivation of personal freedom. Nothing is more tragic than the government deciding what your job will be and how you will live. For that reason, I believe there is no better system on earth than democracy, a system that guarantees these sacred freedoms. And the last thing I would read is a prayer. Apparently, and he doesn't seem to know why, his sister told him this happened, and it's pretty remarkable. His mother seemed to have a special fondness in her heart for him, not only compared to all his siblings, but even her own husband. She would give prayers not for her husband or other children. She had one prayer that was saved only for him. Began, I ask you, O Spirit of the mountains, to shower this young man with wealth. Keep watch over him and protect him. See far and wide from the situation, but be visionary from great heights. A faithful servant, a flower in others' eyes. Be embracing like the land. Be of sound body and spirit. May he be blessed with longevity. Indeed he was. Each step bearing fruit. Indeed they did. A long series of amazing steps by an amazing man that actually I think puts the whole world in his debt.
Did everybody receive the 저기 동시 통역기를 받으셨나요? 앞에 입구에서 아까는 총님 영어로 하시는 건가요? 우리말로 해주세요.
그 동시 통역을 한다 해서 통역기를 입구에서 놓아드렸는데 제가 이렇게 뵈니까 하고 계시는 분이 한 분도 없어서 제 짐작으로는 이 정도 영어는 다 충분히 하신다 이렇게 하는데 이제 지금 이용구 총리님만 남았는데 이 총리님은 영어로 하실 건가요? 그러면 지금이라도 좀 갖다 가지고 오시지 주위에서 도와주시는 분들이 그래서 필요한 분 좀 넣어주세요.
이게 뭐 시간도 없는데 뭐 지금 그걸 갖다가 드리는 것도 좀 뭐하고 난 아주 간단히 할게요. 어떻게 하면 좋을 것 같아요?
필요하신 분들한테 넣어주세요. 그러면 총리님 한 2, 3분만, 한 1, 2분만, 1, 2 minutes.
잠깐만 기다려.
We thought they gave out translation at the entrance, but it seemed nobody received. 필요한 분 넣어주세요. 그리고 시작하겠습니다.
근데 내가 그냥 영어로 그럼 하겠습니다. 왜 그러냐면 우리 정주영 회장에 대해서는 여기 오신 분들은 다 잘 알고 있기 때문에 뭐 나중에 이제 또 더 책을 자세히 보셔도 좋을 것 같고 간단히 제가 그럼 영어로 몇 말씀 드리겠습니다. 뭐라고 했어?
하셔도 되겠어요. 그래도 좀 갖다 필요하신 분들만 갖다 드리시잖아. 시작하시면.
I too like to congratulate the publication of Chung Ju-young's autobiography, largely because it will contribute to the understanding of Korea, particularly Korea of 20th century, for those who doesn't read or speak Korean. Chung is a very special person, but he was not alone. What he had achieved, what he had done, is a part of the history of 20th century Korea. And as Professor Wolfowitz already mentioned, it was a remarkable history, particularly the second half of 20th century. But I think Chung was able to do this because many Koreans, particularly the people in the leadership position in politics, in business, in culture, indeed, so many Koreans shared very common historical perspective, that is, second half of 20th century was a God-given opportunity for Korea to make a major development, to make our country really one of the best country supported by a society which cherishes all the important values we have inherited, but also the values we joined with the international or global community. What I'm really trying to say is that many people shared Chung Ju-young's vision during the 20th century. That's how we have been able to achieve what you have just described. But of course, Chung Ju-young is the most prominent, maybe most prominent person who signifies this achievement. After all, what was it like in the 20th century? Chung Ju-young lived from 1915 to 2001, so he's basically a man of 20th century. But the first 30 years of his life was under Japanese rule, which meant that Koreans had to experience the age of imperialism. It's not just Japan, but whole world had experienced all kinds of imperial practices in 19th century and 20th century. And Koreans suffered a great deal. And the second half, we also suffered from what you may call the age of ideology. The world was divided between East and West, led by the United States and then Soviet Union. And Korea became a frontier for the ideological clash between these two camps. Now, without further saying anything, it's a very difficult situation, but Koreans, mostly the eminent leaders, but also common people, had a hope and also belief that somehow we can make it if we work hard and if we put our wisdom together. And I think Mr. Chung was a real leader who was always in front of the people and courageously followed his instinct as well as his belief. My second point is, in such an atmosphere, generally the nationalism could overwhelm everything else. But in case of Korea, Koreans wanted to join the world. So they made an extra effort to join international trend, international fashion, international organizations and anything called international or global. If there is something international or global, Korean instinct was, let's join it. That's the only way perhaps we could find ourselves in the front line of the march of the humanity toward the future. And Chung was a good example. Whether he was in business or in other fields, he always said, let's try to be one of those who stand in the front line when we achieve something globally together. And he had practiced it. So I think that tradition still carries on. And I don't want to say anything about North Korea at this point, but the tragedy was in that march of Koreans in 20th century, particularly in the second half, the North Koreans, for a variety of reasons, decided to be an exception to the international trend, which was really a tragic mistake from my perspective. Finally, let me just say that Chung is a happy man because he had achieved so many things. But particularly, he relied on common sense. Just 2 days ago, my friend Karen House showed me a book with the title, Teaching Common Sense. I'm told that this is a book about a kind of group teaching at Yale for the students, emphasizing the importance of common sense. But my impression of late Mr. Chung is that basically he has a best common sense. And also, he has a strong belief to rely on common sense. And I think his success depended on that belief and that the kind of life. And the foundation he started, the Asan Foundation for Social Welfare, which was started in 1977, and at the time, the Hyundai, the construction was the main company, and he was the owner. He donated 50% of the stock to the foundation. This was a remarkable thing to do in those days. But his reason was very simple, based on common sense. That is, we are trying to build a great nation and great society. But what is a great society? He just said two things. A bright boy couldn't go to school because there's no money. It's no good. We have to provide something for these kids to go to school. More importantly, if someone sick in the family couldn't go to hospital because of no money or no support, that's a tragedy. So common sense told him that you should do something about this. That's the beginning of the Asan hospitals. Now there are 8 hospitals around Korea as an example of what could be done. So this was a great achievement. But one day, his son, MJ, came to me and could we start some institute or research institution like the Heritage or Brookings or CSI. So what he was trying to say was that what impressed him most when he went to Washington to get his PhD at Johns Hopkins was that there are so many outstanding institutions which really researched and presented a very good national policy plan, which in many cases had furnished grounds for the successful US government operation, both in Congress and in the executive branch. So he said, maybe I'll start something like that in Korea. I said, by all means, because after all, social welfare, the Asan Foundation, that's your father's achievement. You should do something. And you now said you'd like to create a really world-class research institute on policy studies, by all means. And that's how he started. And I think, among other things, that institute, Asan Institute, has started this plenum for several years. So this is a great achievement. So they are very happy people. When you have, I'm from the father's viewpoint, the son studying at Seoul National University, then going to US, to MIT and Johns Hopkins and so on, and doing all this research institute. How proud the father would be. Happy man. Now, more than that, 1993, early morning, MJ came to see me. So what's up? I just came back from England, serving as ambassador there for a couple of years. He said, a few days ago, he was elected the president of the Korean Football Association. And he said, he promised to the members that if I become the president of Football Association, I'll try to bring the World Cup to Korea. So I said, do you think you can really bring the World Cup to Korea? Because I wasn't sure, because I saw many football games in UK and in Europe, and it's something exciting, but the difference between European culture and our setting is such that it doesn't look like there is a good chance. And MJ's answer was that, well, he's not that sure, but when my father said he will bring the Olympics to Korea, he didn't believe it. So he actually told his father, can you really bring the Olympics? As usual, Mr. Chung's answer was, how do you know unless you try it? So let's try it. And he traveled around the world many, many times, and MJ, I think, carried the bag and also translated as an interpreter and so on. But finally, we had the 1988 Olympics. There are many stories. But let me just conclude by saying that I don't think there's any father and son in the world today, father bringing Olympics to your hometown, and son bringing World Cup to your country. So all in all, this is a success story, and we are celebrating their achievement. But as I began my remark by saying that it's not individual achievement. Many Koreans actually share the same aspirations, same feelings about our country, and everybody tried to cooperate to achieve something big. So while we celebrate the achievement of Mr. Chung Ju-young, Asan, and of course his son and his associates. I would like to say that Korea has been successful because of the spirit which Chung has personally testified and left a living legacy to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. I'd like to ask Dr. M.J. Chung to say the last words before we close the session. So please, Dr. Chung. It's 50th anniversary of Ed Feulner's marriage to Linda. So please, congratulations. And he flew in at 4 in the morning this morning, and he's still sitting. So another applause, please.
네, congratulations.
Thank you. Congratulations. You've got to catch up. You're only 40 years.
Strategic patience. 감사합니다. 이제 이렇게 늦은 시간까지 이렇게 와주셔서 고맙고요. 제가 아주 짧게 말씀드리고 마치도록 하겠습니다. Translating my father's autobiography was a labor of love. I would like to thank again all those who have helped a lot. My special thanks to Ed Feulner, Karen House, Paul Wolfowitz, and my former professor, Dr. Lee Young-go. Thank you, everyone, and please continue to enjoy the rest of the evening. 감사합니다. 고맙습니다.